I never thought I would be the kind of daughter who could cut her own mother out of her life. Growing up, I believed there was something sacred about the bond between a mother and child, something unbreakable, no matter how stormy the years got. But when I look back now, when I trace the jagged scars carved into my memory, I realize the bond I thought I had was never real. My name is Emily. I'm 36 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how the woman who gave me life also shattered it. How she stole from me, betrayed me, and forced me to face a truth that nearly destroyed me. I grew up in a small coastal town where the houses were old and the gossip traveled faster than the tides. My father, Richard, was a quiet man who loved books more than people, and my mother, Diane, was the kind of woman everyone in town thought was glamorous, perfect hair, bright smile, a laugh that carried across any room. To outsiders, we were the perfect little family, but behind closed doors, it was a different story. My father worked long hours at the library, maybe because it was easier to lose himself in dusty pages than deal with my mother's sharp tongue. She was beautiful, yes, but she was cruel in a way beauty can sometimes mask. I learned early that love from her was conditional. If I brought home straight A's, I got a hug. If I gained a little weight, she pinched my sides and told me no boy would ever want me. When I cried, she rolled her eyes. "You're too sensitive, Emily," she'd say. "You'll never survive this world if you don't toughen up." I remember nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe something was wrong with me. Why couldn't I be the kind of daughter she wanted? Why couldn't she love me the way I needed? My father tried in his own quiet way, but he was no match for her. He was gentle, almost fragile, and his way of protecting me was slipping me book stories where daughters were heroines and villains got what they deserved. He used to whisper, "You're stronger than you think, Em." I held on to those words like lifelines. By the time I was 18, I couldn't wait to leave. College felt like escape. I promised myself I wouldn't look back. But life has a cruel way of pulling you back into the places you try hardest to run from. When I was 26, my father passed away. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. I got the call from my mother, her voice sharp, almost irritated, as though she were annoyed he had inconvenienced her by dying. I rushed home, but I barely recognized the woman standing in our living room, glass of wine in hand, more concerned about funeral arrangements than about the man who had shared her life for over 3 decades. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and casseroles from neighbors. I tried to grieve, but every time I let a tear slip, my mother shot me a look that said, "Don't you dare make a scene." After the burial, she disappeared into her bedroom with a bottle, and I was left sitting in the silence of our old house, the smell of lilies making me sick. It wasn't until months later, when the lawyer called me, that I learned my father had left me something more than something, actually. He had set aside an inheritance for me, $500,000 money he had quietly saved from investments, book royalties, and whatever he could scrape together. I sat in that lawyer's office, stunned. My father, the man who always seemed so unworldly, had been building this safety net for me. It was his last gift, his way of making sure I had a future. But when I went to my mother expecting maybe for once a shared moment of love or pride, she was cold. She said, "That money belongs to me. I was his wife. You're just the child." I thought I misheard her at first. The lawyer had been clear it was mine legally. But when I tried to argue, she unleashed a storm. She accused me of being ungrateful, of trying to steal from her, of never understanding what she had sacrificed. Her words were daggers, each one sharper than the last. I left her house that day shaking, confused, but determined not to let her take what my father had meant for me. Except somehow she did. I don't even know how she managed it. Maybe she manipulated the lawyer. Maybe she forged signatures. Maybe she leaned on the town connection she always bragged about. All I know is, one morning, I woke up, checked my account, and the money was gone. Vanished. $500,000, everything my father had left for me, drained away, siphoned into accounts I couldn't trace. When I confronted her, she smiled. Actually smiled. "You don't understand, Emily," she said. "I deserve it. You'll waste it. This way at least it stays in the family." That was the moment something inside me broke. I stood there looking at the woman who gave me life, who was supposed to protect me, and I realized she would always choose herself over me. Always. My grief twisted into rage, and for the first time in my life, I shouted at her. I told her I hated her. I told her she had destroyed me. I walked out of that house and swore I would never come back. For months, I lived in a haze of anger and despair. That money wasn't just money, it was security freedom, a symbol of my father's love. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. I tried to rebuild, but every step forward dragged me back into memories of her betrayal. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying her words, her smirk, wondering if maybe she had been right, if maybe I wasn't worthy of my father's love, if maybe I really was just too weak, too sensitive. But here's the thing about wounds like that, they fester. And the more they fester, the more you crave some kind of reckoning. Revenge became a whisper in the back of my mind, growing louder with each passing day. And then something happened that shifted everything. One evening, months after I cut my mother off, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name scrawled in handwriting that looked oddly familiar. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 7 words. "You don't know the whole story, Emily." I must have read that line 100 times, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know what it meant or who had sent it, but it stirred something in me, fear, yes, but also curiosity. What story? What truth? What could possibly explain what my mother had done? I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was a cruel prank, but deep down, I knew. There were things I didn't know about my family, things my father had kept quiet, things my mother had buried. And now, like ghosts rising from the grave, they were coming for me. The letter was the beginning of a journey I never wanted to take, a path through shadows and secrets that would test everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and the people I loved. I wish I could tell you I walked into it with courage, but the truth is, I was terrified. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family secrets don't stay buried forever. They claw their way to the surface, and when they do, they don't just break the surface, they break you. And I was about to be broken in ways I could never have imagined. I stared at that letter for days, unable to throw it away, but too afraid to confront it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face. I remembered the quiet way he used to tuck envelopes into the books he gave me, like little secrets hidden between pages. I wondered if maybe this letter had something to do with him. But who would send it now, and why after all this time? Finally, I couldn't take the gnawing anymore. I picked up the phone and called the only person I thought might know something, my Aunt Margaret, my father's younger sister. She lived 2 towns over, and though we weren't close, she had always been kind to me. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Emily, it's been so long. Are you all right?" I wasn't all right, but I couldn't say that out loud. Instead, I told her about the inheritance, about what my mother had done, and then about the letter. There was a long pause on the line, a silence so heavy I could hear her breathing. I think she finally said, her voice trembling, "It's time you knew the truth. Meet me tomorrow. Noon." at the old cafe on Main Street. And come alone. The way she said it chilled me. I barely slept that night. My dreams were full of shadows and whispers, fragments of memories that didn't quite belong to me. The next day, I drove to the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached. When I walked in, Aunt Margaret was already there, sitting in the corner booth with a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray, her shoulders heavier with something I couldn't name. When she saw me, her eyes softened, but there was sadness there too. "You look just like your father," she said quietly. I slid into the booth. "Please, Aunt Margaret, tell me what's going on." She hesitated, glancing around the cafe as if afraid someone might overhear. Then she leaned forward, her voice low. "Your mother. She's not who you think she is. And your father. He wasn't just protecting you from her sharp words. He was protecting you from something much darker." Her words made my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" she sighed, pressing her hands together. "Emily, your mother didn't just take your inheritance out of greed. She took it because she was desperate, because she's been running from something for years." I felt my pulse quicken. Running from what? "From the truth," she whispered. "From secrets about your father, about you." Her words hit me like a slap. I shook my head. "No, my father, he was kind. He wouldn't." "I know," she interrupted gently. "Your father loved you more than anything. But there were things you never knew about him, about the choices he made. And your mother. Well, she was part of it too." The air between us felt heavy, like it might crush me. I wanted to scream at her to stop talking, and yet I needed to hear every word. She told me about the early years of my parents' marriage, about how my father had inherited some money from his own parents and invested it wisely. That explained the nest egg he left me. But she also said there had been trouble, dark trouble. Business partners who weren't trustworthy. Deals that went bad. And debts. Debts that weren't just financial, but dangerous. "Your father tried to shield you from it all," Aunt Margaret said. "He didn't want you touched by the ugliness. But your mother, she got tangled in it. She made choices, bad ones. And when he died, those choices came back to haunt her. That money he left you, she took it because she thought she could fix what they'd started years ago. She thought she could keep you safe." Safe! The word rang in my head, almost mocking me. Safe from what? I asked her that, but Aunt Margaret only shook her head. "It's not my story to tell. But I will say this: don't trust everything you think you know. There are things buried in that house in your family's past that will change the way you see both of your parents." She slid something across the table, a small worn key. "This was your father's. It opens the lockbox he kept hidden in the attic. I think it's time you read what's inside." I left the cafe with the key burning in my palm, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to throw it into the ocean and never think about it again. But another part, the part that had spent sleepless nights wondering why my own mother could betray me so deeply, needed answers. That night, I drove back to my childhood home. I hadn't been there since I cut my mother off, and pulling into the driveway made my chest tighten. The windows were dark, but her car was parked outside. I didn't knock. I didn't want to see her face. I just slipped inside quietly, like a thief in my own house. The attic was dusty and cold, the kind of place that smelled of secrets. I pulled the chain to the single bulb, its light swinging as if nervous. I found the lockbox tucked behind old trunks. My hands shook as I slid the key in and turned it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them tied together with twine. I untied the bundle and began to read. They were in my father's handwriting, addressed to me but never sent. Letters written over years, each one full of confessions. I read about how he had once trusted the wrong man, a business partner named Charles, who had stolen from him and threatened to expose things my father had done in desperation to provide for us. I read about how my mother had gotten involved with Charles, how she had struck deals behind my father's back to try to keep us afloat. And then I read the most devastating truth of all.
One letter dated just a year before his death said,
"My dearest Emily, if you are ever reading this, it means I have failed to protect you from the past. The truth is, Charles is not just an old partner. He is your mother's secret. And though it breaks my heart to write it, there is a chance you are not truly my daughter by blood." The words blurred through my tears. I dropped the letter to the floor, my body trembling. Not his daughter. The man who raised me, who gave me stories, who whispered that I was strong, wasn't my real father. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the attic apart. But all I could do was sit there sobbing, clutching the letters to my chest. Everything I thought I knew about my family had just collapsed around me. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it, a creak on the stairs. My mother's voice cold and sharp.
"What are you doing up there, Emily?"
My blood ran cold. I shoved the letters back into the box, but it was too late. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes narrowing as they landed on what I was holding. Her face went pale.
"You weren't supposed to find those."
The way she said it, like it wasn't fear, but fury, lit a fire in me. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter begging for scraps of her love. I was a woman who had been lied to, betrayed, robbed.
"You stole everything from me,"
I said, my voice shaking.
"Not just the money, my entire life."
She stared at me, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't understand, Emily. You never did. I did what I had to do. For you. For us." But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. Not after everything I had read. That night marked the beginning of a war between us. A war of silence and glares and unsaid truths. I left the house with the letters clutching them like weapons. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if my mother was willing to steal my inheritance to lie about my father, to bury these secrets, then what else was she hiding? And what would it cost me to uncover it all? I didn't sleep for days after that night. I kept the letters beside me, reading and rereading them until the words carved themselves into my brain. Each page was like a knife peeling away the skin of the life I thought I'd lived. I felt like a stranger inside my own memories. The hardest part was reconciling the man I'd called Dad with the possibility that I wasn't his by blood. Did that make his love for me less real? Did it mean that every bedtime story, every whispered, "You're stronger than you think," was built on a lie? Or did it mean that he had chosen me every single day, despite the betrayal he must have felt toward my mother? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much pain he must have carried, silently protecting me from the storm that was my mother. The inheritance, the letters, they weren't just gifts. They were proof of his choice. Proof that, blood or not, I was his daughter. But my mother's shadow loomed larger with each passing hour. I couldn't shake her voice from that night in the attic, the cold certainty with which she'd said, "You don't understand." I did what I had to do. I needed answers. Real answers, not just the fragments my father had left behind. And that meant confronting her. I called her one evening, my hands shaking as I dialed. She answered on the second ring, her tone clipped. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. Meet me tomorrow. The cemetery, noon." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh. "The cemetery." "You've always been dramatic." "Fine. I'll be there.
The next day was gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that looked ready to burst. I stood by my father's grave, the letters in my bag, my heart pounding. When my mother arrived, she was dressed in black, as if for a funeral. Her hair was perfectly styled, her lips painted crimson. She looked out of place among the headstones, like a performer stepping onto the wrong stage. She didn't greet me. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting.
"Who is Charles?" I demanded. "Is he my father?" Her face didn't flinch, but her eyes flickered just for a moment. That was enough.
"Answer me!" I shouted, my voice breaking in the cold air. Finally, she sighed, almost theatrically. "Yes. Charles. He was part of my life a long time ago, before you were born, and after. Your father knew. He always knew. But he loved you anyway."
The words knocked the breath out of me. Even though I'd read them in my father's letter, hearing her say, it made it real in a way ink never could. I felt the world tilt. "Why didn't you tell me?"
"Because it wouldn't have changed anything," she snapped. "You're mine, Emily. That's what mattered. Your father? He was weak. He couldn't give us the life we deserved. Charles could. He promised me more. He promised me everything."
I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You call Dad weak. He gave me love. He gave me safety. You gave me nothing but cruelty." Her lips curled into a smirk. "And yet here you are, still desperate for my approval." That was the moment something inside me hardened. I realized I would never get what I wanted from her. I would never hear her say she loved me, never hear her admit she was wrong. She wasn't capable of it, but she wasn't done. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think I stole that money just for myself?"
"You're a fool, Emily. Charles came back after your father died. He wanted his share. He threatened me. He threatened you. I took that money to pay him off."
My stomach dropped. You gave him $500,000. She nodded as if it were the most logical thing in the world. It was the only way to keep him quiet.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father's final gift to me, the thing that was supposed to secure my future, handed over to the man who had already stolen so much from us.
"You didn't protect me," I whispered.
"You betrayed me. Again."
She laughed bitterly. "You'll never understand what it means to survive, Emily. You're too soft. Too much like him." I turned and walked away, my body trembling with rage. I didn't look back. But the truth has a way of following you even when you try to run. A week later, I got another letter. Same handwriting, same lack of return address. This one said,
"Your mother lied. Charles is not your father. Look deeper."
The words shook me all over again. My life felt like a maze with no exit, every corner revealing another twist. Who was sending these letters, and why were they dangling pieces of truth, like breadcrumbs leading me deeper into the darkness?
I decided to investigate Charles myself. I tracked down old records, dug through archives, even visited the courthouse where my father had once fought legal battles with him. Piece by piece, I built a picture of a man who was ruthless, manipulative, and dangerous. But the more I dug, the clearer it became. The timelines didn't add up. My mother's affair with Charles had ended years before I was conceived.
So why had she lied? Why would she claim he was my father when he wasn't? The answer came late one night when I was sifting through the last bundle of my father's letters. At the very bottom, tucked beneath the rest, was an envelope addressed differently. Not to me, but to whoever finds this.
Inside was a single page, my father's handwriting shaky, as if he had written it in his final days.
The truth is complicated. Emily is not Charles's child. She is not mine either.
Diane was already pregnant when we met. But from the moment I saw her, I chose her as my daughter. She is mine in every way that matters. If you love her, protect her from Diane's lies. I sat there in stunned silence, the paper trembling in my hands. Not his child, not Charles's, but someone else's. Someone I had never even considered. I thought about my mother, about the layers of deceit she had woven, and I realized she didn't just steal my inheritance. She stole my identity. She stole my right to know who I truly was. The rage that rose in me then was like fire in my veins. For so long, I had let her define me too sensitive, too weak, unworthy. But now I saw her clearly. She wasn't a mother. She was a thief of souls, and I was done letting her steal mine. I decided I would confront her one last time. Not to beg, not to plead, but to take back what she had stolen. My truth. I drove to her house the next evening, my father's final letter in my bag. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me, but not pleased. "What now?" she asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. I held up the letter. "I know everything. You lied about Charles. You lied about Dad. You've lied about me my whole life. Who is my real father?" For the first time, I saw something crack in her expression. Her eyes darted away, her mouth tightened. She didn't have a quick answer ready. "Tell me," I shouted, "or I swear I will never forgive you. Not in this life, not in the next." Her shoulders slumped, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was cold. "You wouldn't survive knowing the truth. Try me." She stared at me for a long time, then finally whispered a name I recognized, a name that made the ground tilt beneath me, because it wasn't Charles. It wasn't anyone from her glamorous circle of friends. It was someone I had known my entire life, someone I had trusted, someone who had always been there in the shadows. And with that name, the pieces of the puzzle began to rearrange themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. The name fell from her lips like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. It was Uncle David, my father's best friend. The man who had been at every birthday, every holiday, every milestone of my life. The man who had carried me on his shoulders when I was little, who had comforted me when my father died, who had told me stories of their wild younger days. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You're lying," I whispered. "You're just saying that to hurt me." But deep down, I knew it was true. The look on her face wasn't her usual cold mask. It was something rawer, almost ashamed. "David was there when your father couldn't be?" she said, her voice low, almost trembling. "It was just once, a mistake. But then I found out I was pregnant and your father, he wanted you. He wanted to raise you as his own. He said it didn't matter. But I couldn't look at you without seeing the truth." Her words tore through me like glass. All those years of cruelty, of coldness, of cutting remarks, was it because I was living proof of her betrayal? Because every time she looked at me, she saw her sin staring back at her. I staggered back, clutching the doorframe for balance. My chest ached, my vision blurred. I didn't want to hear any more, but I couldn't stop. "Does he know?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Does David know I'm his daughter?" She hesitated, then nodded. The room spun. He knew. All those years, and he knew. He had watched me grow up knowing he was my father, and he had said nothing. I ran out of the house before she could say another word. My car felt like a coffin as I sat there gasping for air. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the steering wheel. I didn't drive to my apartment.
I didn't drive anywhere safe. I drove straight to David's house. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, something in his eyes flickered recognition, guilt, dread. He didn't even have to say it. His silence was confession enough.
How could you? I demanded, my voice raw. How could you keep this from me? How could you let me live a lie?
He reached for me, but I jerked back. Emily, please, I thought it was best. Your father, your real father, the man who raised you, he wanted it that way. He wanted to protect you. He made me promise, protect me. I spat the words like poison. By stealing my identity, by letting me grow up believing I was unloved by the woman who gave birth to me. You call that protection. His face crumpled, but I felt no pity. My entire body shook with rage, with grief, with the unbearable weight of betrayal. You don't get to call yourself my father, I whispered. Not after this. Not ever. I left him standing there on his porch, his shoulders sagging, his face pale. I didn't look back. The days that followed were a blur of anger and sorrow. I cut them both off my mother and David. I blocked their numbers, ignored their emails, shut the door on their desperate attempts to explain. I couldn't listen. I couldn't bear to hear another excuse. But even as I tried to shut them out, their shadows lingered. I couldn't escape the truth that had been forced on me. I was the product of betrayal. My very existence was a reminder of broken vows, hidden lies, stolen years. For a while, I spiraled. I drank too much. I stayed up until dawn, reading my father's letters over and over, clinging to his words like a lifeline. He was the only one who had never betrayed me. He had known the truth, and still he had chosen me. Still, he had loved me. That realization became my anchor. He wasn't my father by blood, but he was my father by choice. And maybe that mattered more. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild myself. I started therapy. I wrote down everything I had learned, every secret, every wound, every truth, and I let the pages soak up my pain. I sold what little I had inherited after my mother squandered the money, and I used it to start fresh in another city. But the past has a way of finding you. One evening, months later, I got a message. It was from David. Just a single line.
I'm sorry. I'll love you always whether you let me or not.
I stared at it for a long time. My chest ached, but I didn't reply. Some wounds can't be mended. Some truths leave scars too deep to heal. As for my mother, I never saw her again. Word reached me through distant relatives that she'd fallen ill, that she wanted to reconcile before it was too late. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. She had stolen too much, my inheritance, my identity, my chance at a mother's love. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if cutting her off completely was the right choice. I wonder if forgiveness would have given me peace. But then, I remember her words in the attic, her smirk at the cemetery, the cruelty that shaped my childhood. And I know some people don't deserve forgiveness. What I learned is this family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay, who choose to love, even when it's hard. My father, the man who raised me, proved that. His love was real, even if his blood wasn't. And my mother, she taught me something too, though not in the way she intended. She taught me the cost of lies, the poison of secrets, the devastation of betrayal. She taught me what I never want to become. So I cut her off. I let her go. I built a life without her shadow. And though the truth nearly destroyed me, it also set me free. Because sometimes revenge isn't about screaming or fighting,
or even exposing the people who hurt you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply surviving without them, living well in spite of them, refusing to let their sins define you.
If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever had to cut ties with family to save yourself, then you understand the kind of strength it takes. I hope my story reminds you that you are not alone, that your worth isn't defined by the people who couldn't love you right.
Please, if this touched you, leave a comment below. Share your own story, your own scars. Like this video, subscribe for more, and pass it on to someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the act of telling the truth, even a painful one, is what keeps us alive.